Great room, great stuff, and I'm in the edutainment section. Yeah, my 30 years in academics, and I'm reduced to bad jokes. You know, in the beginning, when you start lecturing, you don't pick your lectures or topics, they pick you. So in the beginning of my career, I got emergency department delivery. Then I got Fournier's gangrene for the 5-minute consult. And it just kept going. And everything I got seemed to be focused on the perineum. I don't know how that happened, but that's what happened. So anyway, we're going to talk about that happens in Vegas. The swear word is in the title, so if you're going to be offended by swear words, or if you brought your children and you don't want them to learn this stuff because they already know it from the schoolyards, you know, please take them out. And we're not going to get too exotic with this. We're going to do basic stuff. Here, what do I got here? Forward, that's got to be next. There we go. Yeah, I'm moving. Declarations, nothing to know. I thought a little bit about what we're going to do, and I started looking on the internet for stuff that has to, and I don't work in Vegas, so we're going to talk about stuff that happens everywhere, really. But there's specific things about Vegas. Let's, you know, have a delightful, you know, you can find these e-cards, but that one doesn't go out very much. This is the one that goes out, you know, peace. We're getting hammered, tired of hearing about your stuff. And so we're going to start talking about alcohol. But we have to note that one of the reasons why things happen in Vegas is that you have to come up with a reasonable explanation for where $500 went. So people come in, I don't gamble, but there's a plausible explanation for what happened to $500 on a nightly basis. I can say I lost it, and that's critical because that gives you budgetary latitude. Really, the secret to the whole success of this city is budgetary latitude. Plausible explanations for where $500 went, which opens the door for all kinds of things like the hangover. And so we're going to start when we talk about drugs, and I love talking to the cops and stuff about drugs because they want to convince you that, you know, the plague of methamphetamine and urban cocaine is ruining your life. Anyone who's spent even a day in an emergency room or 2 days in an emergency room knows that the drug that's making you miserable in your life, that's causing the most ER presentations, is alcohol. And that's the one right there. And you can see, I like this one because I like the combination of the beer and the small vodka. That shows some industrial intent. I like this one, another drunk girl. I like the attempt. You know, when you're a guy, sometimes you just don't feel like you get enough love, and maybe that would help. Here's the truth about alcohol. I love these kinds of pictures. This is what happens when 10 people sit around a table with 10 drinks on it. So you might think that we got, you know, obviously there's a dickhead on the one side who's getting hammered. There's going to be no fun in no time. Then you have like 6 people in there splitting a drink. They're just not at the party they want to be at. One of them is going to turn into a dickhead at the next stop. They're just not it. Then you have 3 abstainers. They might be designated drivers or they're just not loose enough. But anyway, that's what happens, generally speaking. And it is obviously why we see people in the emergency room. And I love the triangle. The width of this triangle depends on where you work. Like it could be 1 death and 5,000 emergency department. Where we work, it's 5,000. The triangle's much, much wider because LA County is a level 1 alcohol receiving. You may not have gotten that for your hospital, but the Joint Commission can come in and survey you to find out if you have enough, missions in the area and enough bars to get you level 1 designation. But it's amazing, and just about every way you can die, alcohol's in there, right? It's half of all motor vehicle fatalities. It's, you might think, well, it has nothing to do with a fire. No, it's like 2/3 of all fire deaths. If you want to look at murders and you include both the murdered and the murderer, it's like 2/3. It just goes on and on. You might think farm deaths. Well, they're living the good life. Half of all farm deaths, because being a farmer is painful and boring. I always love it when people say, I want to have some sheep. I grew up on farms in Western Massachusetts. Yeah, no, you only think that. Wait till you spend 1 week on a farm. You'll be like, that. There's a lot of feces on farms, and somebody has to move it. Wait till you're out there at 4 a.m. in January to milk some cows. Let me tell you what 4 a.m. looks like in New England. It's not the morning. It's the middle of the goddamn night. You're walking out to the barn in darkness. Your feet are frozen and some cow steps on your foot. You're like, ah! So you need a drink. And not of milk. And this is what they look like. For those of you who are HIPAA concerned, this is an actor. from our hospital, one, aka a resident, a clinghead. They're very cooperative. They yank their Foleys out and they kick you. So we're talking about Vegas, so I noticed this. This is great. There's a new treatment. This bus will drive up. Some of you needed this morning. I know some of you needed this because I've talked to a bunch of you already. You needed it this morning. This bus will swoop by, pick you up, and here's what it looks like. Here's the pictures of the imaginary patrons with an appropriately looking nurse and, checking records because they might have records. And a doctor who's writing. And look at them. They got their makeup on. They're watching TV. They're talking among themselves. Of course, it's 3 attractive women and 1 dude. There's some IVs hanging. This is the actual picture, all right, of the thing. All right, so there's a couple things about this picture I love. First, I like that both guys are unconsciously manhandling the woman. I like that. That's the most action they got last night, is on the bus couch. And then the next thing I want to know is, damn, dude, who does your plastic surgery? Because you're like halfway to the Catwoman. That's what the doctor who works on the bus looks like, and I believe that for real. For those of you who are old enough to have read The Rape of Emergency Medicine, you'll remember that line. When a doctor's licensed in multiple states, they're equally incompetent to practice in all those states. I bet this guy's got like 7 states, at least. So let's talk about a hangover. I love hangover, and I love alcohol biochemistry. That, I guess, establishes me as a geek. And so I want to remind you that the classic hangover headache is a hemicranial headache, which when you first think about it, you're like, well, my whole body was drunk. Why does my head hurt on one side? So let's go through it. So remember this formula, twice sodium BUN over 2.8, and then see that alcohol over 4.5? That's a reminder that if you had an alcohol level of 250, you raised your peripheral serum osmolarity a lot. You turned your periphery into alcohol metabolites, which then sucked the juice out of your CSF because it couldn't all get across evenly as you metabolize it. And so as this peripheral osmolarity dries your brain and turns it into a raisin, the reason you wake up with a hemicranial headache is that's the side of your brain that was down. You actually beached your brain like a whale on your calvarium. It was like we're supposed to be floating here. It was like someone dragged your brain up onto your calvarium and left it there. And you'd like to make some CSF to float this thing on the next rising tide, but you peed so much during the night that you just don't have any fluid in your body to make any CSF, and that's what a hemicranial headache is. No, really, that's what it is. And then there's this other problem, and there actually have people who know nothing about alcohol have written papers about you don't get hypoglycemic and Wernicke's doesn't exist. And the reason they write these things is because they don't work in a level 1 alcohol receiving. I can tell you all those papers are wrong. Working in a level 1 alcohol receiving makes it very clear to you these things are all very real. So let's just go over and remind you that, see that 2 + 2 + 2? When you drink vodka, it's lots of calories, but it's no complex carbos. That's why they talk about Guinness for strength. Can someone get me a Guinness? I'm coming. Anyway, but there's no complex, there's lots of calories, but it's all in 2-carbon forms. And the problem is your body can't do 2 + 2 + 2 = 6. You can't do that. You can do 3 + 3 = 6. That's called gluconeogenesis. But if you're drinking all vodka, that's why alcoholic ketoacidosis is like starvation ketoacidosis, because you can't get any glucose going. You are hammered, plenty of calories, but no glucose. So when you see a really drunk person, remember to give them some sugar. That's the only sweetness you have to offer. That's fine. D5NS. And that'll help them so that they don't get this. For those of you who are curious what the 2 + 2 + 2 thing is, you're like, why can't I do that? That's called photosynthesis. So unless your patients have leaves, and you plan on leaving them out in the sun, they can't make the sugar that way. So don't try and ask them to. Give them some sugar. And then there's this thing, people think, I hear this all the time. In fact, there's someone in the audience here who was my mentor, Ed Newton, who used to say, we don't see Wernicke's anymore. And I remember one time we were passing on to each other. There was this guy who, he had all the manifestations of chronic, he had the Dupuytren's, the cherries, the rhinophyma, it looked like Carl Malden. And he was altered back there. And I was like, well, did we give him some time? And he goes, we don't really see Wernicke's. And right in front of him We gave him 700 milligrams of thiamine. The guy woke up and said, I got to check on my stocks. It was just, so it's out there. And remember that when you give 100 of thiamine, that's not enough. That's only to prevent someone from getting Wernicke's. If they're already encephalopathic, you need to give 1 gram of B vitamins. And of course, when you do that, the nurses will ask you to sign something and do things. It's like you're giving plutonium. Oh no, we are entering the B vitamin protocol. Get the pharmacist. Heaven forbid you want to give 500, a B vitamin? Yeah, so they'll give you a hard time. Of course, then you'll try and find 500 of thiamine on your CPOE. And it'll, of course, you'll be identified as a vitamin B criminal. And you won't be able to do it. But Wernicke's is out there, and if you work in a level 1 alcohol receiving, and you see a hard drinking person, you'll see it still. Let's talk about some other basic stuff. I'm not going to get too exotic about the drugs. Butane hash oil, this is the new thing, right? They take a pipe, they stuff it with dope, they jam lighter fluid to it, and THC, almost pure THC, comes out the bottom. Then you got to evaporate the butane fluid, the lighter fluid off, right? And then you get this honey, this earwax. It's called butane hash oil. Now, the people who make this aren't the smartest. So they got this thing, this waxy stuff with butane in it. They figure they can evaporate it with an open flame. No one there says, dude, I think that's lighter fluid. So every once in a while, the does blow up. It's causing fires in homes, and we've been seeing people with blast injuries and stuff like that. But the stuff that comes out is super high potency. And the dope today, for those of you in the room who are old enough to remember when, we started smoking, like when I was a kid, you could smoke 2 joints and just have some Fritos and be good. Nowadays, the dope is so strong, it will seriously you up. And seriously, like it's, it's bad, and people get paranoid and tachycardic, and they dive out of moving vehicles and like that. And it's really, the marijuana that I grew up smoking in high school, no one ever went to the emergency room. But this stuff, even when it doesn't explode, people are going to the emergency room. And all these people walking around with these e-cigarettes, if they look like they're having too much fun, that's because it's not an e-cigarette. They're dabbing that e-cigarette in this. So you can smoke butane hash oil in your vape. And so that's what's going on. Every once in a while, they didn't get all the butane off of it, and the still blows up on you. So this is that's a vape wound right there where it's vape. He heard an odd whistling, which was the ignition sequence being wired to his vape from NASA in Houston. We are clear for liftoff. He was like, what is that? No. Bam! And it blew a little hole in the side of his head. When you see that, you could be pretty sure that there was something wrong. Now, this is different from, have you guys seen the exploding cigarette prank? You can buy these exploding cigarettes to with your tobacco addicts. But this is different. So this was butane hash oil blowing up on the side of his head. And these synthetic cannabinoids that are out there, like Spice, JWH, right? That's the chemist from, where was he from? South Carolina or somewhere where? There you go, Clemson, JWH, 018. Yeah, he thought he was doing good research, and he started a big problem. But they have high cannabinoid 1 receptor, and their urine screens will be negative, and they look like sympathomimetics, so we're not necessarily recognizing these kids as just stoned, but that's what they are, because they're, and they're all psychotic, and it's just, this didn't happen when we smoked dope as kids. It just didn't happen. So, and then there's methamphetamine. There's a lot of methamphetamine out here in the desert because white people like it, and they live generally in the desert. If you ask what in the United States, generally speaking, sand people are white people. They have things, they believe, and there's mud people too, like they have jet skis. But they're all the same people. They have like a truck with a bunch of vehicles and stuff. But they do this stuff, and they're causing a lot of problems. I like the bottom data. 2/3 of deaths with methamphetamine are trauma versus 1/3 medical. If you go to cocaine, it's exactly the opposite. And that's why law enforcement doesn't like methamphetamine, because people are paranoid and nasty. Really paranoid and nasty when that's what they're doing. And ecstasy here, you could be out in the club, you might have some ecstasy. Ecstasy, when it's real ecstasy, doesn't produce that many ER visits because it's relatively safe. It does cause STDs, I think. But the sex stuff aside, you're not going to end up in the emergency room. Every once in a while, some kid will overdo it, and they'll get hyperthermic, and their liver will melt, and they'll get rhabdo, and they'll die. But that doesn't happen often. And most of the time when that happens, it's bad ecstasy. You know the clinical picture, right? It's somebody who's not old enough to drink, This is what happens when you deny kids access to alcohol, right? They do other stuff. They're doing super strong pot or ecstasy and things like that. And so these are kids that come into your emergency room usually after 2 in the morning when the raves close down, and their mental status looks fairly normal. There's no antidote, and they have their things. There's bad ecstasy out there too, in Los Angeles anyway, and probably here in Las Vegas too. Most of the bad ecstasy is tableted dextromethorphan, which is really not a good thing. If you've ever watched that puking on that whole series of puking people, just go to it and just look up skittling the dextromethorphan. On YouTube, you can watch 30 teenagers barf their guts out. It's hysterical. But that's from liquid dextromethorphan, and there's a difference between liquid and tableted. The tableted DXM is dextromethorphan hydrogen bromide. So if you did happen to get a Chem 7 on them, you'd be looking at it because you're a tox person. You remember I'm supposed to measure the anion gap. That's all you remember from tox. And you calculate it out, and the anion gap is reversed. You're like, something must be wrong with the math here. I've never seen an anion gap of -12. And the reason that happens is because the bromide is measured as chloride, and so they get a reversal of the, if you ever see that, it's not your math problem, it's dextromethorphan. So you'll see these raving kids, and they got pacifiers for their bruxism, and they're into lights. They call it an enactogen, an empathogen, all these things, which basically means they feel each other up. Which takes us back to the STDs, and they get all sweaty and they have binkies. I like this picture because they have name tags in case they forget. They're all sweaty. This looks like Eurotrash to me. I'm pretty sure this is in the United States. I mean, I don't know a lot about Eurotrash, but I know it when I see it, and that looks like Eurotrash. But they do come to Vegas. But anyway, so that takes us back to, so where did the $500 really go? And so the $500 could have gone to a bunch of places, and it could have gone for the drugs. So now you have a possible, or it could have gone to a strip club, and here you see a very hot bitch who had a good night. I had to work hard on that. She told them, of course, that maybe they could live happily ever after. And I know that most of the men in here know that you're not going to live happily ever after with a stripper, but sometimes your dreams come true. Thank you.